The Christmas Time Forgot. Chapter 1. The Shift No One Wanted. The Westbridge Quantum Research Facility sat on the edge of the city like a forgotten fortress, its concrete walls half buried in snowdrifts, and its windows glowing with the faint, cold light of emergency power. On Christmas morning, the place looked less like a cutting-edge scientific institution and more like a mausoleum for abandoned ideas. Ryan O'Connor parked his aging sedan in the only plowed spot in the lot. The rest of the spaces were untouched, blanketed in pristine white. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and the distant hum of the facility's backup generators. "Merry Christmas, Ryan," he muttered to himself. Living the dream. He grabbed his thermos, zipped up his coat, and trudged through the snow toward the entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a reluctant hiss, as if annoyed to be disturbed on a holiday. The lobby lights flickered awake, revealing a security desk occupied by a single guard, Frank, who was asleep with a Santa hat pulled over his eyes. Ryan cleared his throat. "Morning, Frank." Frank snorted awake. "What? Oh, O'Connor. Right. You're the poor bastard on duty today." "Lucky me." Frank gave him a sympathetic look. "Everyone else is home with their families. You sure you don't want to just pretend you were here and go home?" Ryan forced a smile. "Wish I could. Kendall wants the Harbinger diagnostics done before the end of the year." Frank grimaced. "That thing gives me the creeps." "Join the club." Ryan scanned his badge and headed down the long corridor toward Lab 4B. The building was eerily silent. No chatter from the break room, no clatter of carts, no hum of conversation. Just the soft buzz of fluorescent lights and the echo of his own footsteps. He passed the decorated tree in the atrium, still lit, still cheerful, still mocking him with its festive glow. Someone had left a plate of cookies on the table beside it. They were untouched. Everything here was untouched. He reached Lab 4B and keyed in the access code. The heavy door unlocked with a metallic thunk. Inside, the lab was a cathedral of cold metal and blinking lights. At the center of the room sat the device, Project Harbinger, a circle of interlocking rings suspended in a magnetic cradle, cables snaking out from its core like roots from an ancient tree. The rings were etched with microchannels that pulsed faintly, as if the machine were breathing. Ryan set his thermos down and rubbed his hands together. "All right, let's get this over with." He powered up the console. The monitors flickered, then stabilized, displaying streams of data and diagnostic readouts. Everything looked normal. Everything looked routine. He ran the first sequence, then the second, then the third. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, then began to fall. The world outside celebrated Christmas with warmth and laughter and family gatherings. Inside the lab, Ryan worked alone, surrounded by machines that didn't care what day it was. By late afternoon, he was exhausted. His eyes burned, his shoulders ached. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "One last test," he said. "Then I'm out of here." He typed the final command. The machine hummed. The rings began to rotate. The lights dimmed. A vibration rippled through the floor, subtle at first, then stronger. The air shimmered around the device, bending the light like heat rising from asphalt. That's new." He stepped back. The hum grew louder. The rings spun faster. The air thickened, charged with static. "Stop," Ryan said, hitting the abort command. Nothing happened. "Stop." He slammed the button again. The machine ignored him. A blinding flash erupted from the core, white, pure, absolute. It swallowed the lab, the walls, the floor, the world. Ryan felt himself falling. Then, nothing. Chapter 2. Christmas Morning. Again. Ryan woke with a violent gasp. His heart hammered against his ribs as if trying to break free. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The sterile white of the lab, the blinding flash, the sensation of falling. Those were the last things he remembered. But he wasn't in the lab. He was on his couch. At home. The TV glowed softly in the dim room, playing It's a Wonderful Life, the same scene he'd watched the night before, George Bailey running through the snow, shouting greetings to the town. Ryan sat up slowly. His head throbbed, his mouth was dry, his clothes were the same ones he'd worn to the lab. "What?" he whispered. He grabbed his phone from the coffee table. December 25th, 7:12 a.m. He blinked. Hard. No, that's not right. He checked the date again. December 25th. He stood abruptly, nearly tripping over the blanket tangled around his legs. He rushed to the window and yanked the curtains open. Outside, the neighborhood was exactly as it had been yesterday morning. Snow on the lawns, Christmas lights still glowing. A kid across the street dragging a sled toward the small hill near the cul-de-sac. Ryan's breath fogged the glass. This can't be happening. He threw on his coat and stepped outside. The cold slapped him awake. The air smelled of pine and chimney smoke. A neighbor, Mr. Delaney, was out front, wearing the same plaid pajamas Ryan had seen him in yesterday. "Morning, Ryan," Delaney called cheerfully. "Merry Christmas." Ryan stared at him. "Didn't you say that yesterday?" Delaney laughed. "I mean, yeah, it's Christmas." "No, I mean—" Ryan stopped. The words felt ridiculous, even forming in his mouth. "Never mind. Sorry. Have a good one." "You too." Ryan hurried to his car, hands shaking as he fumbled with the keys. The engine sputtered to life, and he sped toward the lab, ignoring the empty streets and the eerie stillness of a city on holiday. When he reached the Westbridge facility, the parking lot was empty. Again. The same untouched snow, the same single plowed spot, the same sense of abandonment. He rushed inside. Frank was asleep at the desk. Again. "Frank," Ryan shook him awake. Frank jolted upright. "What? Oh, O'Connor. You're here early." Ryan stared at him. "We had this exact conversation yesterday." Frank frowned. "Pretty sure we didn't. Yesterday was Christmas Eve. Today's Christmas." "No," Ryan said, voice cracking. "I was here yesterday. I ran the diagnostics. The machine activated. There was a flash. And now I'm back here again." Frank blinked slowly. "You feeling okay, son?" Ryan didn't answer. He sprinted down the corridor, his footsteps echoing like gunshots. He reached Lab 4B. The door was locked. He entered the code. Inside, the lab was pristine, untouched. The machine sat dormant, humming softly in standby mode. The console showed no signs of the diagnostics he'd run, no logs, no errors, no record of the activation. It was as if yesterday had never happened. Ryan approached the device cautiously, as though it might spring to life on its own. He checked the power levels. Stable. He checked the temporal field readings. Normal. He checked the system clock. December 25th, 6:03 a.m. Earlier than when he'd woken up. His stomach twisted. He whispered, "I'm in a loop." The words hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. He backed away from the machine, hands trembling. He tried calling Dr. Kendall, straight to voicemail. He tried Dr. Kim. Voicemail. He tried the emergency line for the facility. A recorded message played. "Our offices are closed for the holiday. Please call back during normal business hours." He tried the government hotline. Same message. He tried the local news station. No answer. No one worked on Christmas. No one could help him. He was alone in a day that refused to move forward. He sank into the chair at the console, staring at the machine that had swallowed the world and spit it back out unchanged. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, think." But thinking didn't help, because the truth was already sinking in, cold and heavy. Christmas wasn't just happening again. It was happening instead. And unless he figured out how to undo what he'd done, it would happen forever. Chapter 3. The Loop Tightens. Ryan didn't sleep the second time Christmas arrived. He sat on the couch in the dark, watching the clock tick toward midnight, waiting to see if the day would reset again. He didn't blink when the final seconds approached. He wanted to witness it. He wanted proof. At 1200 hours, the world flashed white. He woke on the couch. Again, same movie, same time, same Christmas. He didn't gasp this time. He just sat there, numb, letting the truth settle deeper into his bones. He was trapped. By the third loop, he tried to break the pattern. He didn't go to the lab. He didn't leave the house. He didn't even turn on the lights. He sat in silence, waiting to see if the loop required his participation. It didn't. Midnight came. White flash. Reset. By the fourth loop, he tried to warn people. He knocked on neighbors' doors. He tried to explain the situation to strangers on the street. He even stopped a police cruiser and begged the officer to listen. No one believed him. They smiled politely. They asked if he was okay. They wished him a Merry Christmas. By the fifth loop, he realized something else. The world wasn't changing. Not even slightly. Every snowflake fell in the same pattern. Every dog barked at the same moment. Every commercial on TV played in the same order. It wasn't just a repeated day, it was a repeated recording. A perfect copy of the same 24 hours. And he was the only one unsynced. By the sixth loop, he returned to the lab. He needed answers. He needed data. He needed to understand what the machine had done. Lab 4B was exactly as it had been the first time. The device sat dormant, humming softly, as if mocking him. He checked the logs again. Still nothing. No record of the activation. No trace of the flash. But something else caught his eye. A faint flicker in the corner of the room. The Christmas light strung along the lab's observation window dimmed for a fraction of a second, then brightened again. It was subtle, so subtle he might have missed it if he hadn't been staring directly at them. He frowned. That didn't happen before. He watched the lights for several minutes. Nothing. No flicker. No glitch. But the moment stuck with him. If the loop was perfect, nothing should change. Not even a flicker. Which meant the loop wasn't perfect. It was degrading. He checked the device's internal diagnostics. Buried deep in the system logs, far deeper than he'd looked before, he found a warning he'd never seen. He scrolled further. A note from Dr. Kendall appeared in the code comments, half-finished and never meant for him to see. Temporal loops require a fixed emotional or physical anchor point. Without one, the loop destabilizes. Ryan stared at the words. A fixed emotional anchor. Something or someone was holding the loop in place. He whispered, "What did I do?" He replayed the moment before the flash. He remembered thinking about Christmas, about childhood, about the holidays he missed, about the ones he wished he could relive. His chest tightened. The machine hadn't just activated. It had locked onto him. He was the anchor. He was the reason the loop existed. And if the loop was degrading, he didn't know what would happen when it finally broke. But he knew one thing. He had to find a way to end Christmas. Before Christmas ended everything. Chapter 4. Attempts to break the day. Ryan woke on the couch for the fourth time, the familiar glow of the TV washing over him like a taunt. He didn't bother checking the clock. He already knew the time. He already knew the date. He already knew the movie scene playing. He stood, grabbed his coat, and left the apartment without a word. If the loop was anchored to him, maybe he could break it by changing his actions. He tried everything he could think of. He drove out of town. He crossed the county line. He kept going until the gas gauge dipped toward empty. But the world didn't change. Every radio station played Christmas music. Every store was closed. Every road was empty except for the occasional family car heading to a relative's house. He turned around and drove back. Next loop, he tried staying home. He unplugged the TV. He turned off his phone. He sat in silence, refusing to participate in the day at all. Midnight still reset everything. Next loop, he tried chaos. He knocked over trash cans. He shouted in the street. He threw a snowball at Mr. Delaney's inflatable Santa. Nothing mattered. The loop didn't care what he did. By the 8th loop, he returned to the lab with a new strategy: brute force. If the machine had created the loop, maybe destroying it would end it. He grabbed a fire axe from the emergency cabinet and swung it at the console. Sparks flew, screens shattered. He smashed the power conduits. He tore out cables. He brought the axe down on the device's outer casing until the metal dented. He stood there panting, surrounded by wreckage. Midnight came. White flash. The lab was pristine again. The machine was untouched. The loop reset everything except him. By the 10th loop, Ryan stopped trying to break the machine. He stopped trying to break the day. He stopped trying to break anything. He sat in the lab, staring at the device, feeling the weight of the loops pressing down on him like a physical force. He whispered, "What do you want from me?" The machine didn't answer. But the flicker in the Christmas lights returned, just for a moment, just long enough to remind him that the loop wasn't stable. Something was slipping. Something was failing. And if the loop collapsed before he figured out how to end it, he had no idea what would happen to him or the world trapped inside it. Chapter 5. The Isolation Begins. By the 11th loop, Ryan stopped pretending he could brute force his way out of the problem. He stopped smashing things. He stopped shouting at strangers. He stopped trying to outrun the day. The loop didn't care about his panic or his desperation. It didn't even acknowledge them. Christmas simply arrived, and arrived, and arrived. He wandered through the city like a ghost. The streets were quiet, coated in fresh snow that never melted, never turned to slush, never bore footprints for more than a few minutes before the loop reset. Every house glowed with warm lights. Every window framed a family gathering. Every sound was familiar, predictable, rehearsed. He walked through the mall, its doors unlocked as always. The holiday decorations sparkled with the same artificial cheer. The same carols played on the speakers. The same Santa display sat in the center court, surrounded by empty velvet ropes. He sat in the food court with a cold pretzel and watched the world repeat itself. A janitor pushed a mop across the same tile pattern. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve near the toy store. A couple argued quietly near the escalator. None of them changed, none of them remembered. He whispered, "I'm the only one awake." The words echoed in the cavernous space. By the 13th loop, he tried to talk to people again, not to warn them, but to feel something human. He approached a barista at a closed coffee kiosk, even though the place wasn't operating today. She smiled politely, the same smile she'd given him every Christmas morning for the past 13 loops. "Sorry, we're closed today," she said, exactly as before. He nodded. "I know." He lingered, hoping she'd say something different. Anything different. She didn't. By the 15th loop, he stopped trying to talk to anyone at all. He walked through the frozen day like a man drifting through a memory. He watched families open the same gifts. He watched children squeal at the same toys. He watched snow fall in the same patterns, each flake identical to the last loop. He felt like he was haunting his own life. By the 17th loop, he began noticing small cracks in the perfection. A flicker in a street lamp. A momentary glitch in a TV broadcast, a snowflake that seemed to hang in the air a fraction too long before falling. The loop was degrading. He didn't know what that meant. He didn't know how long it would hold. He didn't know what would happen when it broke. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. If he didn't find a way to end Christmas soon, the loop wouldn't just trap him. It might tear the world apart. Chapter 6. The First Breakthrough. By the 18th loop, Ryan stopped pretending he could simply endure the repetition. The loop wasn't stable. The flickers in the lights, the glitches in the broadcasts, the strange hesitations in falling snow, they were all getting worse. The day was repeating, but the seams were showing. He returned to the lab early, determined to dig deeper into the machine's diagnostics. If the loop was degrading, the device had to know something about it. Machines didn't lie. Machines didn't forget. He powered up the console and navigated past the standard menus, diving into the buried system logs he'd found before. The warnings were still there, but now the numbers had changed. He swallowed hard. The stability had dropped 3% in a single loop. That wasn't good. That wasn't good at all. He opened the diagnostic window. A graph appeared showing a faint but growing waveform, like a heartbeat, but irregular, unstable. The machine was detecting something inside the loop, something that didn't belong. He leaned closer. Is that me? He checked the timestamp. The echo appeared at the exact moment he woke up each loop, the moment he became conscious, the moment he remembered. His pulse quickened. The machine wasn't just looping time, it was tracking him. He sat back, the realization settling over him like a weight. If he was the anchor, then the loop was tied to his awareness, his memory, his emotional state. The machine had latched onto the strongest resonance in the room when it activated. And that resonance had been him. He whispered, "I did this." The words felt heavier each time he said them. He ran another scan. The temporal echo spiked briefly, then stabilized. The waveform pulsed in sync with his heartbeat. He placed a hand on his chest, feeling the rhythm. The machine was listening to him. He wasn't just the anchor. He was the core. He stood abruptly, pacing the lab. If the loop was tied to him, then breaking it meant severing that connection. But how? He couldn't simply stop remembering. He couldn't erase his own emotions. He couldn't shut off the part of himself the machine had latched onto. Unless... He stopped pacing. Unless the anchor wasn't just emotional. Unless it was tied to something specific. A memory. A moment. A feeling. He thought back to the instant before the flash. He'd been thinking about Christmas. His childhood Christmases. The ones he missed. The ones he wished he could relive. He'd been nostalgic. He'd been vulnerable. He'd been open. The machine had grabbed onto that. He whispered, "It's not Christmas that's stuck. It's me." He stared at the device, the rings gleaming softly in the dim light. If he wanted to break the loop, he needed to understand what part of him the machine had anchored to, and he needed to let it go. But he didn't know how. Not yet. Chapter 7. The Message in the Machine. By the 19th loop, Ryan knew he couldn't keep circling the same questions. The machine wasn't just malfunctioning, it was communicating. The temporal echo wasn't noise, it was a signal. And if the loop was anchored to him, then the machine was trying to tell him something about himself. He returned to the lab before dawn, the building silent except for the hum of emergency power. He sat at the console, fingers hovering over the keys, unsure where to begin. The diagnostics were clear. The loop was degrading. The anchor was undefined. The echo was growing stronger. He opened the anomaly logs again. The waveform pulsed steadily, rising and falling like breath. He watched it for several minutes, trying to understand what it meant. Then he noticed something new. A pattern. Every time he thought about the moment before the flash, about Christmas, about his childhood, about the memories he'd been replaying in his mind. The waveform spiked. He froze. The machine wasn't just tracking his awareness, it was tracking his emotions. He leaned closer, whispering, "You're reading me." The waveform pulsed in response. He swallowed hard. If the machine had anchored to his emotional state, then the loop wasn't tied to Christmas itself. It was tied to what Christmas meant to him, the nostalgia, the longing, the unresolved grief. He thought of his father, gone now, years gone. He thought of the last Christmas they'd spent together, the one he'd replayed in his mind 1,000 times. He thought of the cinnamon rolls his mother used to make, the ones he could almost smell when he closed his eyes. The waveform spiked sharply. He whispered, "It's my memories." The machine pulsed again, as if confirming. He sat back, stunned. The loop wasn't a malfunction. It was a reflection, a mirror of the emotional resonance he'd carried into the activation. The machine had locked onto the strongest signal in the room, his longing for a past he couldn't return to. He whispered, "I anchored the loop to a memory." The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. If the loop was tied to his emotional state, then breaking it meant confronting the memory at its core, not avoiding it, not suppressing it, facing it. He stood slowly, the lab suddenly feeling too small, too bright, too cold. He needed to go home, not to his apartment, to where the memory lived. He grabbed his coat and left the lab, the machine's faint hum following him like a heartbeat. Outside, the snow fell in perfect looping patterns. The same flakes, the same wind, the same day. But for the first time, Ryan felt something shift inside him. Not in the loop, in himself. He whispered into the cold air, "I know what you're anchored to." And for the first time since the loops began, he felt a direction, a way forward. Chapter 8. The Ghost of Christmas Past. Ryan drove through the quiet streets with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since the loops began. The snow fell in soft, looping spirals, identical to every previous iteration, but this time he wasn't watching for glitches. He wasn't looking for cracks in the world. He was looking for home, not his apartment, not the lab, not the life he'd built as an adult, his childhood home. He hadn't been back in years, not since his father passed, not since the last Christmas they'd all been together. The memory had always been too heavy, too sharp, too full of things he wished he'd said. But the machine had anchored to that memory, and the loop wouldn't break until he faced it. He turned onto the old street, the houses lined with familiar decorations, wreaths, lights, inflatable snowmen. His mother's house sat at the end of the block, warm light glowing from the windows, smoke curling from the chimney. It looked exactly as it had when he was a kid. He parked and stepped out, breath fogging in the cold air. His boots crunched on the snow. The sound felt impossibly loud in the stillness. He hesitated at the door. He hadn't knocked on this door in years. He'd always found excuses, work, distance, grief he didn't know how to carry. But now the loop had forced him back here, to the place where the emotional resonance had begun. He raised his hand and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. His mother stood there, wearing the same red sweater she always wore on Christmas morning. Her eyes widened in surprise, then softened into warmth. "Ryan," she said, "you didn't say you were coming." He swallowed hard. I needed to see you." She stepped aside. "Come in, sweetheart." He entered the house, and the smell hit him instantly. Cinnamon rolls, pine needles, the faint scent of old wood and holiday candles. It was the smell of every Christmas he'd ever loved. He walked into the living room. The tree was decorated exactly as he remembered. The same ornaments, the same lights, the same angel on top. A home video played on the TV, grainy footage of a Christmas morning from years ago. His father's voice echoed from the speakers. "All right, Ryan. Open that one next." Ryan froze. His mother glanced at him. "I found some old tapes. Thought it'd be nice to watch them today." He couldn't speak. The sound of his father's voice, warm, alive, familiar, hit him like a punch to the chest. He sat on the couch, staring at the screen as his younger self tore open wrapping paper with wild excitement. His mother sat beside him. "You miss him?" He nodded. "Every day." She placed a hand on his arm. "He'd be proud of you, you know." Ryan's throat tightened. "I don't know about that." "I do." He watched the video in silence. His father laughed on the screen, a sound Ryan hadn't heard outside of memory in years. The loop hadn't created this moment. It had preserved it, frozen it, held it in place like a snow globe. He realized then why the machine had anchored to this memory. He had never let it go. He had never moved past it. He had been living in the shadow of a Christmas that no longer existed, longing for a past he couldn't return to. The machine had sensed that longing, amplified it, and locked the world into the emotional resonance he carried. He whispered, "I'm the reason the loop won't break." His mother looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He shook his head. "Nothing, just thinking." But inside, the truth was clear. If he wanted to end the loop, he had to release the memory. He had to stop clinging to the past. He had to let Christmas move forward. He stood slowly. "Mom, thank you for this, for everything." She smiled softly. "You're welcome, honey." He hugged her, longer than he ever had before. When he stepped back, he felt lighter, not healed, not whole, but ready. He walked to the door. Outside, the snow fell in perfect looping spirals. But for the first time, he felt the loop loosen its grip. He whispered into the cold air, "I'm ready to let go." And somewhere, deep in the lab, miles away, the machine's temporal echo shifted. Just slightly. But enough. Chapter 9. The Weight of Realization. Ryan drove back toward the city with the heater blasting and his thoughts racing faster than the car. The visit to his mother's house had cracked something open inside him, something he'd been holding shut for years. The loop hadn't created that memory. It had exposed it, amplified it, weaponized it. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. If the machine had anchored to his emotional resonance, then the loop wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was a reflection of his unresolved grief, his nostalgia, his inability to move forward. He whispered, "I'm the problem." The words felt heavy, but they also felt true. He reached the lab just as the sun dipped behind the horizon. The building loomed in the cold twilight, its windows glowing faintly. He swiped his badge and stepped inside, the familiar hum of emergency power greeting him like a ritual. Lab 4, B, was exactly as he'd left it, clean, orderly, untouched by the chaos of his previous attempts. The machine sat in its cradle, rings gleaming softly, as if waiting for him. He approached the console and opened the anomaly logs again. The temporal echo had changed. The waveform was less erratic now, more focused, as if the machine had sensed the shift in him. He whispered, "You know." The waveform pulsed. He sat down, fingers hovering over the keys. He needed to understand what the machine required to release the loop. If the anchor was emotional, then the solution had to be emotional too. But the machine wasn't a therapist. It couldn't interpret feelings. It could only measure resonance. He scrolled through the system notes again, searching for anything he'd missed. A line of code caught his eye, something he hadn't noticed before. He exhaled slowly. The machine wasn't holding him hostage. It was waiting for him to let go. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the device. The rings shimmered faintly, reflecting the lab lights. He thought of his father. He thought of the last Christmas they'd spent together. He thought of the guilt he'd carried for years, guilt for not visiting more, for burying himself in work, for letting time slip away. He whispered, "I'm sorry." The waveform spiked, then softened. He closed his eyes. He let the memory come, not the idealized version he'd clung to, but the real one. The laughter, the warmth, the imperfections, the love, and the loss. He let himself feel it fully, not as a wound, as a truth. When he opened his eyes, the waveform had stabilized. The echo was quieter now, less frantic, as if the machine had sensed the shift. He stood slowly. He wasn't done yet, but he was closer. He approached the device, placing a hand on the cool metal of the outer ring. "I'm ready," he said softly. "Tell me what comes next." The machine hummed in response, a low vibration that resonated through the floor. For the first time since the loops began, Ryan felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. Chapter 10. Breaking the Anchor. Ryan stood in the center of Lab 4B, the machine humming softly in the dim light. The rings glowed with a faint, pulsing warmth, as if responding to his presence. He felt the weight of the loops pressing against him, but for the first time he wasn't crushed by it. He understood it. He approached the console and opened the system interface. The temporal echo waveform was calmer now, steadier, no longer spiking wildly with every flicker of emotion. The machine had sensed the shift in him. It was waiting. He whispered, "All right, let's finish this." He navigated to the core settings, menus he'd avoided before because they were never meant to be accessed alone. He ignored the warnings and opened the override panel. A new prompt appeared, one he hadn't seen in any previous loop. He stared at the options. Forced severance sounded violent, dangerous, unpredictable. If the loop was tied to his emotional resonance, ripping that connection apart could destabilize the entire temporal field. It could collapse the loop in ways he couldn't control. But emotional dissolution, that was what he'd already begun. The machine responded instantly. The rings brightened. The hum deepened. The waveform on the screen shifted into a slow, rhythmic pulse. The lights dimmed. The air thickened. The machine's rings began to rotate, slowly at first, then faster, creating a soft, resonant vibration that filled the room. Ryan stepped closer to the machine, feeling the heat radiating from the core. He placed a hand on the outer ring, the metal warm beneath his palm. He closed his eyes. He thought of his father, not the idealized version he'd clung to, but the real man. The laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments, the imperfect, human love. He let the memory come without trying to freeze it in place. He whispered, voice steady, "I accept that he's gone. I accept that I can't go back. I accept that Christmas has to move forward." The machine pulsed. He continued, louder now, the words rising from somewhere deep inside him. "I release the memory. I release the day. I release the loop." The machine's hum intensified. The rings spun faster, blurring into a halo of light. The waveform on the console flattened, then dissolved entirely. The light grew brighter. The floor vibrated. The air rippled. Ryan stepped back, shielding his eyes as the machine reached critical resonance. The hum became a roar. The lab dissolved into white. For a moment he felt weightless. Then, silence, darkness, and the faint sensation of falling. Chapter 11, December 26th. Ryan woke with a jolt. No flash, no falling sensation, no blinding white light. Just waking. He blinked at the ceiling, disoriented. The room was dim, lit only by the soft morning sun filtering through the blinds. The TV was off. The air was still. The world felt different, heavier, quieter, real. He sat up slowly. His heart pounded as he reached for his phone on the coffee table. His hand shook as he turned it over. December 26th, 8:03 a.m. He stared at the date, unable to breathe. Then the breath came all at once, ragged, relieved, overwhelming. He laughed, a sound that cracked into something like a sob. He pressed the phone to his forehead, eyes closed. "It's over," he whispered. "It's really over." He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street was alive in a way it hadn't been for days. Cars moved, people walked dogs, a delivery truck rumbled past. The world was no longer frozen in holiday stillness. Christmas had finally ended. He stepped outside, letting the cold air hit his face. The snow was different, messier, imperfect, marked by footprints and tire tracks. The sky was brighter. The sounds were unscripted, nothing repeated. He felt the difference in his bones. He drove to the lab, needing to see it with his own eyes. The parking lot was full. Employees walked briskly through the snow, coffee cups in hand, chatting about their holidays. The building hummed with life. Inside, the security desk was busy. Frank wasn't asleep. He was talking to another guard, laughing about something on his phone. Ryan approached. Frank looked up. "Morning, O'Connor. Back already? Didn't expect to see you the day after Christmas." Ryan smiled faintly. "Yeah, just checking on something." He walked down the corridor, heart pounding. Lab 4B was unlocked. Someone had already been inside. He stepped through the doorway. The machine was powered down. The rings were still. The console was dark. The hum was gone. It looked like any other piece of dormant equipment. He approached the console and powered it on. The system booted normally. No warnings, no anomalies, no temporal echoes, no looping diagnostics. The logs showed nothing unusual. The machine had no memory of the loops. But he did. He placed a hand on the device, feeling the cool metal beneath his palm. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if he meant it, but needing to say it anyway. He stepped back, letting the silence settle. The loop had forced him to confront something he'd avoided for years. It had trapped him, yes. It had terrified him. But it had also freed him from a memory he'd been carrying like a weight. He walked out of the lab, leaving the machine behind. Outside, the world felt new, not because it had changed, but because he had. He drove home with the windows cracked, letting the cold air fill the car. He passed families taking down decorations, kids playing in the snow, people returning to their routines. Life was moving forward, and so was he. Chapter 12. Aftermath. The world felt different on December 26th, not because anything dramatic had changed, but because everything finally could. Ryan walked through the city with a strange sense of dislocation, as if he'd stepped out of a dream and into a life he barely recognized. People hurried along sidewalks, bundled in coats, carrying shopping bags, returning gifts, meeting friends for post-holiday brunch. The ordinary chaos of the day after Christmas. It was beautiful. He stopped at a cafe, one that had been closed for every loop, and ordered a coffee. The barista smiled, not the scripted smile he'd seen a dozen times, but a real one, tired and human. "Long night?" she asked. "You have no idea," he said. He sat by the window, watching the world move in ways it hadn't for days. Cars honked, a dog barked, a kid slipped on ice and laughed. None of it repeated. None of it was perfect. It was messy and unpredictable and alive. He savored every second. Later, he returned to the lab, not because he needed to, but because he wanted closure. The building buzzed with activity. Researchers hurried between rooms, discussing data, planning experiments, complaining about holiday weight gain. Everything was normal. Lab 4B was occupied. Dr. Kendall stood at the console, reviewing the machine's dormant systems. She looked up when he entered. "O'Connor," she said. "Didn't expect you today." "Just checking on the diagnostics," he replied. She gestured to the machine. "We're shutting down Harbinger for a while. Too many unknowns. We'll revisit it next quarter." He nodded. "Probably for the best." She gave him a curious look. "You all right? You look different." He considered lying, brushing it off, pretending nothing had happened. But the truth felt lighter now, easier to carry. "I'm okay," he said. "Better than I've been in a long time." She smiled faintly. "Good. Take some time off. You've earned it." He left the lab, walking through the halls with a sense of finality. The machine was silent. The loop was gone. The day was moving forward. So was he. That evening, he returned to his apartment. The TV was off. The couch was unoccupied. The world didn't reset. Midnight came and went without a flash. He stepped onto his balcony, watching the city lights shimmer against the winter sky. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks popped, early celebrations for the coming new year. He breathed in the cold air, letting it fill his lungs. For the first time in years, he wasn't haunted by the past. He wasn't trapped in memory. He wasn't stuck in a loop, literal or emotional. He whispered into the night, "Merry Christmas and goodbye." The words didn't hurt. They felt like release. He turned back inside, closing the door behind him, ready for whatever came next. Epilogue. A new year approaches. New Year's Eve arrived with a sky full of fireworks and a city shaking off the last traces of holiday stillness. Ryan stood on his balcony, hands wrapped around a mug of hot coffee, watching bursts of color bloom over the skyline. Each explosion felt like a punctuation mark at the end of a long, impossible sentence. He breathed in the cold night air. It didn't smell like cinnamon or pine or nostalgia. It smelled like winter, real winter, imperfect and alive. His phone buzzed with messages from coworkers, friends, even his mother. Invitations, greetings, plans, all things he hadn't felt ready for in years. But tonight he didn't feel the old weight pressing down on him. The loop had forced him to confront the past, and in doing so it had given him something unexpected. A future. He sipped his coffee and leaned on the railing, watching the city pulse with life. Somewhere below, people were counting down the minutes to midnight. Somewhere above, the stars shimmered in the cold sky. And somewhere deep in the West Bridge facility, behind locked doors and layers of security protocols, the Harbinger device sat in silence. Or so he thought. A faint hum, barely audible, barely real, echoed in his memory. Not a warning, not a threat, just a reminder. The machine had responded to him once. It had listened. It had learned. He wondered if it remembered him. He wondered if it dreamed. A firework burst overhead, scattering gold across the sky. Ryan smiled, letting the light wash over him. Whatever the machine had been, whatever it might become, it no longer held him. The loop was broken. The day had moved on, and so had he. He raised his mug in a quiet toast to the night. "To endings," he said softly, "and beginnings." Midnight approached. The city counted down. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt ready to step into the next day, whatever it held. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.